Hello and welcome, I'm Oles Gerjuk and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Today we're talking about John Bolton's visit to Ukraine. The U.S. National Security Advisor once again underscored Washington's support for Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity and Euro-Atlantic path. To dig into this, we welcome to the studio Ambassador Volodymyr Khandogiy, President of the Ukrainian Foreign Policy Association. Hello and thank you for joining us, Mr. Khandogiy.
Hello.
So the official purpose of this visit was to, once again, to demonstrate U.S. support to Ukraine. But could there be anything more than that? Could there be anything behind this agenda?
Well, I wouldn't call it official purpose. It's rather description of what Americans has always been emphasizing, support and all that.
Demonstrating.
But definitely, during the negotiations or during meetings and the talks that have already been there, and we expect more of them. Other issues will be discussed. I'm sure that among other things that will be discussed is Normandy format and recent declarations by John Bolton and other US officials about a possible engagement of the United States to this process. So they will certainly touch base on how Ukraine see the participation of the United States in the Normandy format. Because, as you know, just a few days ago, I think it was Chancellor Merkel that announced that the summit of Normandy format will happen pretty soon, in September. So for Americans which demonstrated their willingness to participate, it's important to sort of find out ways and means how to get into this format.
Well, this is very interesting because this is not the first time that we hear from the United States the willingness to participate in the Normandy format. The first person to voice this was Kurt Volker. If I'm not mistaken, in the end of July, he expressed this, that America is ready to step in the process. And also, America would gladly welcome the United Kingdom also to participate.
Exactly.
But on the other hand, Mr. Putin has never agreed on the Normandy format happening. He has never assured anyone that he would be willing to participate within the old format of 4 countries participating, and especially the thing that I'm concerned about is, would he be willing to participate in the new format if UK and the US would join?
It's a good question. First of all, I would like to mention that, yes, it's not the first time that the United States is talking about the participation in the Normandy format, but it also, we have to also be aware that just last year or 6 months ago, Americans were not, so to say, were not so forthcoming in this sense. They were trying to avoid talking about their participation. So there was an evolution in their position, I assume. And now they're talking openly about their willingness to participate. Whether or not it would be acceptable for Russian Federation, that's a good question. And I myself pretty much pessimistic about this. But we have to start. I mean, we all understand, not all, but expert community and professionals, they realize that Normandy format which exists today, it's 4 countries, hasn't yet produced any tangible results.
Right.
And something has to be done. And if it's a problem without solution now, let's take in some more countries like United States and United Kingdom. So I think it's, first of all, they will discuss, I mean, Bolton today and most probably in Warsaw, Szalinski and Trump will also touch base on this possible enlargement of Normandy format. But of course, the key to the success is in Moscow. But I think the United States has all the possible means and ways and means to impress upon President Putin to really not obstructing this enlargement process.
Well,
but we have to wait and see.
Yeah, we have to wait and see. As far as I remember, the talks between Mr. Trump and Mr. Zelensky are scheduled for September.
The 1st September.
Yes, and we will see, because the Normandy format also is supposed to be held in September, but we can't be sure about that yet. We are expecting that to happen, but let's see. And this is going to be a very interesting dialogue between Mr. Trump and Mr. Zelensky after Mr. Trump was voicing his ideas to readmit Russia to the G8 countries, just because that would be a platform for a dialogue about Iran, Syria. But yeah, the true reason that Russia was kicked out because annexing Crimea was kind of forgotten in his speech. But let's get back to the discussion of John Bolton's visit to Kiev. There was an article published by the Wall Street Journal. It is mentioned that during the visit to Kiev, Bolton would try to convince the Ukrainian leadership to leave the idea of selling motor siege to the Chinese holding Beijing Skyrise Aviation. And just to give our audience some understanding, this is Ukrainian aerospace manufacturer that is one of the largest engine manufacturers for airplanes and helicopters worldwide. What is your take on this? Could this be possible reason, or one of the reasons for John Bolton's visits?
I would rather say that that will be one of the reasons. This is a new issue. The issue of Motor Siege selling shares to China had been raised last year, I think, and it's an ongoing process and ongoing headache for the United States. We know the relations between the United States and China are not
very tense, yes,
their best, and somebody is characterizing those relations as the
trade war.
I mean, so of course they are not interested in Ukraine selling such a very sensitive technology like engines building to their prospective rivalry.
Yes, but they're talking about threats to national security.
Well,
could you explain us
all
the
goes
risks?
under the umbrella of threats to national security.
And plus, John Bolton is national security advisor, so that's logical.
It's really a toxic issue for our relations with the United States. But we also should not forget the recent past. We remember so-called Boucher contract, where Ukraine was stopped from participating in the building of some nuclear facilities in Iran some 15 or 20 years ago. In return, the United States at that time proposed the so-called Kharkiv initiative to Ukraine. I mean, was it successful or not? It remains to be seen still. So what I'm trying to say is that we cannot just, or they cannot just ask Ukraine to stop this contract.
First of all, that they need to propose something in advance?
They have to propose in return. And I mean, this enterprise which we are talking about is not in the government possession. It is a privately owned enterprise, and we have to be aware that you cannot simply stop the transaction between private person and but of course the national interest should be there and should be calculated. So I assume that there should be and will be a kind of proposals that would be interesting for Ukraine as a country and for those owners of this enterprise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is a very interesting topic, and it's even more interesting taking into account that this issue has been developing since 2017, when this entity, Beijing Skyrise Aviation, had already purchased 41% holding a motor siege. But in September 2017, Ukrainian court they put this process on hold, and they've frozen the case after the United States expressed strong criticism towards this issue. But John Bolton keeps reiterating that after buying this motor siege, China would increase its military capabilities in Eastern Europe, and he says that military and sensitive technologies should not be accessed by opponents or potential opponents.
Yes, that's true.
That is true, but China is the opponent to the United States. That now it brings up an issue of Ukraine and China relations.
Yeah, of course, this is also an issue, but it should be taken as a system. Of course, we need the relations with China, as we need the relations with the United States. But to be honest, our relations with the United States values more today. We have strategic partnership with the United States, although China is a very huge economy and very big, prospective partner, but only prospective. For the time being, we cannot really, let's say, put something that would outweigh the relations with the United States on the part of China.
That is true. Plus, China has been always neutral towards the war in eastern Ukraine, and China has been very much friendly with the aggressor state Russia.
Exactly.
So this
is also
complicates the relations between Ukraine and China.
Should be taken into account as well.
Well, John Bolton also, one of the first actually officials that Bolton met in Kiev was Alexander Daniluk, Secretary of National Security and Defense Council. And according to the U.S. Embassy, the two discussed how the United States can support Ukraine in its efforts to integrate more closely into the Euro-Atlantic community and to protect, this is the quote, its industry from the risk of unfair Chinese economic practices. So basically, yes, American side has agreed that there have been some talks about motor siege. And according to Daniluk, according to his post on Facebook, the two discussed intensification of bilateral relations in the field of national security. Yes, because they are both national security advisors. Do you think what do you think? What further cooperation can they come up with?
Well, if we are talking about cooperation in security sphere, of course we mean and we should think about trade in armaments, and I'm sure that the questions of Americans providing Ukraine with weapon was and will be discussed. This is one of the topics that I assume was on the table of the discussion. Certainly, economic reforms, democratic reforms. Those are also topics that Americans normally discuss when they discuss the bilateral relations between two countries. And plus, we have to also be aware of that the timing of this visit, Mr. Bolton's visit to Ukraine, coincides with very important step in our history. And tomorrow will be the first meeting of the Parliament, where the new, we all assume that the new government will be installed, and the Prime Minister and many decisions will be taken tomorrow. So this is an opportune time for American delegation to be here in Kiev to exactly give the practical support to the new president.
To the new president, yes. Well, speaking of timing, after a trip to Ukraine, John Bolton is expected to travel to Belarus, to Minsk, to meet with the country's leader, President Alexander Lukashenko, and also he is expected to visit Chisinau, Moldova. Well, and also worth mentioning that this trip to Belarus would be the highest level U.S. government visit to Belarus in more than 20 years. But this looks like some kind of Eastern European tour of John Bolton, and some experts voiced the opinion that that will irritate Moscow very much, because these are post-Soviet countries, former Soviet countries, and Moscow has been always trying to restore its influence on these former Soviet countries. Do you think that this can have some links?
Well, it certainly, there is a link, and of course Moscow will watch closely
on every visit
to the visit of Bolton to Minsk and Chisinau. But out of the practice, normally when the American high official is coming to Europe, normally he or she covers several states. It was not well, out of the context when somebody comes to Kiev and then goes to Moscow or to Minsk or to...
Yeah, because these are neighboring countries.
But in this particular situation, the important visit is to Belarus. We all know that Americans were very reluctant to continue or to sort of foster bilateral relations with Lukashenko. And this is really a very, very high official coming to Minsk. I don't know what the discussion will embrace, but certainly it's a good sign that Americans are slowly turning themselves towards Belarus, and this is an important thing. Isolating Belarus is not in the best interest neither of the United States nor Ukraine nor anyone else.
Yeah.
So I think we have to really watch closely what's will be going on in Minsk. It will be very interesting.
Yeah, indeed, it's very interesting. Looks like they want to develop this dialogue with Eastern European countries on this issue of national security.
You know that Europe is also slowly lifting sanctions that were imposed on Belarus. Right. Now Americans are coming in. So it's important. On the other hand, we all know that Belarus is fostering closer relations with Russia.
With Russia.
Union state and all that. So they need to balance a little bit.
Well, Belarus needs to balance.
Belarus as well.
Yes, and other participants of the talks too. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Khandogiy, for this conversation, for all these clarifications that you provided us with.
Thank you.
That was Ambassador Volodymyr Khandogiy, President of the Ukrainian Foreign Policy Association. Thank you for watching Head to Head. I'm Oles Gajjuk. Goodbye.